Hello. Welcome to Adventures in Dolls, the United Federation of Doll Clubs YouTube channel. Today our program is on Queen Victoria's dolls, and it's given by Carol Cameron. If you've been enjoying our videos, please give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss your next adventure in dolls. Now let's get to the video.
Thank you, everybody, for this invitation to come along and talk about one of my very, very favourite subjects. I actually started researching this about 5 years ago, and it's one of these stories that every time I do the presentation, there's a new thing to say and a new thing to add. So it's one of these never-ending stories, which actually, I mean, although this started in the first half, the 1800s, as you'll hear as we go through it, every so often something happens and these dolls are brought back into public and under public scrutiny, and it's just one of the best known doll collections of the world. So I hope you enjoy it. So this is the scene for the drama. It's actually Kensington Palace, but actually wasn't always called Kensington Palace. It began as a sort of simple Jacobean mansion. It used to be called Nottingham House, and it was built in 1605. But over the next sort of 300 years, it became increasingly popular with a number of the British monarchs. So whether it was William III or Queen Anne or George I, George II, etc., it was very popular with them. So it had a lot of development. And Christopher Wren was actually involved in its development. So it had high-profile architects involved. And the reason I'm showing this is that it was on the 24th of May, that 1819, in Kensington Palace, the princess, who became later Queen Victoria, was born. And she and her mother occupied a suite of rooms on one floor with her mother, sharing her bedroom. I'll say more about that later on. And some other sort of poor royals, as they were referred to, were also on the premises, her aunts and eccentric uncles, etc. But you'll see a modern picture of this at the end, and you can see it's not changed much over time, but I thought I'd share this print with you. So let me say a bit about her family tree. Here's George III, otherwise known as the Mad King, because he did suffer from bouts of mental health problems. Also very famous for the king who lost us the Americas, because it was during his reign that your country and mine had a slight disagreement about, it was something to do with tax and representation, if I remember rightly, and you guys won. So George was known as the king who lost the Americas. But one thing he was very good at, as you can see here, was producing children. Now, shown on here are his, I think it's 7 sons. He also had 5 daughters, all of whom survived into adulthood, which at that time was very unusual because child mortality was quite rife. And so he did his job with respect to that. But if you look at the next generation, it was his eldest son, George IV, who produced 1 daughter, but by 1817, none of the other children had produced any grandchildren. So Charlotte Augusta, his granddaughter, was the one and only heir to the crown. Now, she was well loved, Charlotte, and very popular, and there was a lot of celebration when she got married. But in 1817, a dreadful thing happened. She became pregnant and she died in childbirth, as did the child. So suddenly there was no next generation to inherit. And that's what triggered what is sometimes called the baby race, because a number of his other children, namely his sons who had not got married to date, started to look for suitable partners. As you can see here, William IV, who was Duke of Clarence, he subsequently became William IV, and Edward Augustus, Duke of Kent. So the 3rd and 4th sons, they both got married. And William had a number of children, but as you can see down here, they either died in childbirth or did not last very long at all. It was Edward Augustus who married and produced 1 daughter, Victoria, who was born on the 24th of May, 1819. She survived into adulthood and she became Queen Victoria. So she never should have become queen, because in theory, a number of these sons should have had children before her. So we were very lucky. She was a wonderful queen, but it was quite a miracle that she actually became queen in the first place. So let me talk a bit about some of the adults in her life. This is, in fact, her father, who I mentioned. He was a military man, as you can probably tell by this portrait. He actually had a very interesting career. He spent some time in Canada and was one of the senior British leaders in Canada. And he was the first member of the royal family to actually cross into the US after 1776. He came here in the US he came to the US for a visit. Now, Victoria never knew him because he died before her first birthday. Now, what is seen in her diary is that Victoria mentions him, and someone has actually counted this 77 times. And she talked to anybody who knew her father to find out information about him. And she built up this very rosy picture of him. There is an alternative version from various historians who say that he didn't take care of his men in terms of his military leadership. So he gets a bit of a mixed press. But to Victoria, as I say, who never knew him, he was a complete hero. Now, this is the mother, Victoria. As I say, she married quite late. In fact, she'd been married before, and she was a widow. And one of the reasons she was such an attractive partner for Edward was she'd had 2 children already by her first husband, both who'd survived. So she had a sort of track record for producing healthy children, if you like. But it was a love match. And as I say, she came over, she was in Germany. She came over with her husband to London to have Victoria born in Kensington Palace, so that if indeed she did become heir to the throne, there was no issue about her birth, etc., etc. So you'll see that, here the Victoria and her mother did not have a particularly good relationship. She was bringing up Victoria on her own, and she was very, very strict with her. And you'll see in a minute about the system that was produced for Victoria when she was young. But Victoria later on will reflect in her diaries that she had a very unhappy childhood, and she held her mother primarily responsible for this. Now, the other figure I would mention is Sir John Conroy. Now, we have such a thing called pantomime in the UK, and usually there's a goodie and a baddie. So John Conroy would have been the baddie in this, and walking on stage, people would have gone boo hiss, because he actually worked for Victoria's father to start with, and when the father died, he worked with the mother. He tried to exert a lot of power, and I mean a lot. He tried to get the mother, he had a big influence with the mother, and he tried to get Victoria to sign various papers to say that he would have this role when she became queen, and the mother would be a regent until she became 18, etc. He was very, very assertive. And in fact, he developed what was called the Kensington system, which you may have heard of. Now, this was where Victoria had to sleep with her mother. She was not allowed to have a bedroom of her own. She was not allowed to walk downstairs without holding the hand of somebody. She was not allowed to mix with children of her own age without permission, and she wasn't allowed to go out anywhere apart from, as you'll hear later, the opera and the theatre. She was very restrictive in her upbringing, and Victoria put this down to Conroy. And in fact, one of the first things Victoria did when she became queen was she moved the mother out of the bedroom so that she had a bedroom to herself, and she sacked Conroy. And he came to a rather sticky end because he did not have the life that he was hoping he would have. But there was one other person that I'd want to mention, and that was Baroness Leyson. Now, Leyson had worked for the mother, and then when the father died, she actually became Victoria's nanny and governess. And she was very, very supportive of Victoria and protected her against this Kensington system. And you'll see here a sketch that Victoria did of, this is Baroness Leyson. Now, what I found was I found a sketchbook that Victoria made, and she was very, very talented. I found numerous sketches of Baroness Leyson. There was not one sketch of her mother. And that told me something about the relationship she had with the Baroness. And the Baroness also played a big part in the dolls, which you'll hear about shortly. Now, Baroness Leyson actually stayed with Victoria through her life and into when she became queen. And it was only when Prince Albert, appeared in the scene and Victoria and Albert got married that it was a bit crowded. So Leyson ended up going back to Germany, but Victoria and her stayed in contact until Leyson's death. But Leyson was, as I say, a very strong supporter of Victoria, got her through her unhappy childhood, and was, I think, viewed by Victoria as more of a mother than her actual mother was. So let's have a look at some of the photographs. These are some of the sketches, as I say, of Baroness Leyson. These are more of Victoria's sort of charcoal sketches. You can see Dash the dog. She was very much into her dogs and painted them or sketched them quite a lot. And again, you can see the sort of lovely expression on Leyson's face here. These are beautiful sketches. These were done with love. That's what when I look at these. So let's look at some paintings of Victoria as she grew up. These are her early years. And as you can imagine, there was no photography at this stage. So there was a lot of paintings and sketches done of Victoria, which tell me, they indicate to us the sort of lifestyle she had. So this is her as a very, very young baby. These are her growing up. I particularly love this one, the sort of innocence of the white dress with the lovely blue sash and the lovely countenance. She's looking a bit more grumpy here, as if it's far too hot. That looks like heavy velvet she's wearing. Maybe it's on a sunny day as well. These are looking a bit more serious. This is her growing up again. Yes, and maybe this reflects the sort of sadness that she felt with her upbringing. This is a sketch of her, or a painting of her sketching. This was one of her things that she was allowed to do. This is another sketch here, black and white. And this is a particularly lovely one. This is when she was age 14, and again, with her spaniel, Dash. And you might be able to spot in the background, if I can move this here, yes, that is actually Windsor Castle. Because by this time, it was confirmed that she was the heir to the throne. And when she was 14, the dolls that had been her constant companion as a child growing up, the dolls were put away by her mother because it was felt that she had to put away childish things and begin to focus on real training for the duty and the role that lay ahead of her as the Queen of not only Britain, but the British Empire. So Victoria herself, it's understood, discovered when she was about 10 or 11, she was looking through a family tree, a bit like the one I showed you, and she worked out herself that she was next in line to the throne. So that must have been, imagine that, a girl of 10 or 11 realising that dawning on her that she was going to be queen. That must have been quite a heavy burden to bear, as well as the Kensington system. So let's now move on to the dolls. Now, as I say, these dolls, as you listen to the story, it comes over to me that these were a substitute for her family, for her loving family, because, as I say, she wasn't allowed to meet with many children or play with them. She was only allowed very restricted access to even the adults. She wasn't allowed to meet with the other members of her family, and she was only allowed to go to the opera and the theatre. So, and she was very artistic. So I'm a mathematician by training, so let me give you some data first of all. The dolls we're going to talk about, there's 132 of them, and the vast majority were little, all wooden Grodnatal dolls. They weren't big princessy dolls. These were very humbly made from cottage industry in the Grodnatals, and it's indication to me that they didn't have a lot of money. Remember, they were poor royals, because up until she became heir to the throne, it was not thought that she would be in line. And for various reasons, her mother didn't have much money. So that's really the reason that it's Grodnatals. There was a few rag babies. You'll see, I think, one sketch of those, but the vast majority were Grodnatals. Now, size-wise, they were dollhouse size from 2 inches, that was the sort of baby ones, to 9 inches. But most of them were between about 6.5, 7.5 inches, and there was a quarter of them between 3 and 5. So these were sort of mostly, as I say, doll's house dolls. Interesting, 70% were adult female, 25% were children and babies, and only 5% were adult male. And I thought about that statistic. But you think, she never met any men, adult men, apart from Conroy, who she hated. She never knew her father. She had ladies in waiting around her. There was no men around her. And it was little girls she was allowed to play with. So she wasn't allowed to see William IV or any of her other adult relatives. So she'd very little knowledge of men. There was 3 groups, and I'll talk a bit more about them. 25% were stars of the opera and ballet, with a lot of them being related to one lady ballet dancer, Taglioni. 50% were courtiers, and 25% were what I call imaginaries. Now, these people didn't exist. There is no evidence that they existed apart from Victoria's head. And she particularly loved creating dolls of the Arnold family. And you'll see more of them later on. But it is believed that they didn't exist. They were in Victoria's head. Maybe it was her idea of what an ideal family might have been like, because she didn't have an ideal family. And as I mentioned, the price, very inexpensive. Pennies in a bazaar, 2p a piece, penny woodens. Very, very non-princessy. Now, the clothes were ranged from very complicated to simple. And the dolls, apart from one, were bought undressed, and they were dressed primarily by Leeson and Princess Victoria herself. There were some other people who dressed them, but they dressed them using scraps of material that they had available, I assume, from making dresses for the princess and for Princess's mother. I'm not expecting to read this, but just to let you know that Victoria made a list which had details of each doll and who had dressed them and how they were dressed. And in fact, for the first time when I visited Kensington, this was a few months ago, that list is out on display, and you can actually see her handwriting in this list of dolls. Absolutely wonderful. But here's the vast array of materials, and it was anything from silk to lace to metal thread. You can read here, plus all sorts of things. So when you look at the dolls, you'll see that they're very ornate in their dressing, which is wonderful. It's the clothing. The dolls are wonderful too, but the clothing is absolutely fabulous. And here we go, 55% dressed by Leeson, 25% by the princess, and 20% by others. And here's some of the other ones. As I say, all ladies. Sarah Sermon, Miss Ditmar, Francisca, Lady Catherine Jenkinson. There is a note that one was bought already dressed at a bazaar by Princess Victoria and Baroness Leeson, and one was bought at Everett's, a toy maker who was active in 1833. I've not been able to track down Everett's yet, but it's work in progress. Now, let me say a bit about the ballet opera. As I say, this was one thing that Victoria was allowed to do very frequently. And in her diaries, she mentions all the different performances she went to. And I made a note of these. And these were all the ballets or operas that she was allowed to go and see. Now, a lot of these we are not familiar. They no longer get produced. But one of the things I picked up, that at the time, ballets were really viewed as sort of acts that went on between, there were things that happened between the acts and the opera. It didn't really have a professional image. And it was Taglioni, that ballerina, who gave it that professional image. And maybe that's one of the reasons that Queen Victoria or Princess Victoria really loved her. I could not find, you see the question down the bottom, I have not found any reference to a miniature theatre that Victoria had. There is a doll's house, and I've got pictures of that towards the end of the programme, but there's no reference to a miniature theatre. I find it difficult to believe, though, she didn't have one, because so many of her dolls were dressed as opera or ballet people, so it would have made sense for her to have a theatre. So let me say a bit about Marie Taglioni. As I say, she was the most celebrated ballerina of her time. She sort of made ballet romantic, if you like. And it was in 1827, she debuted in Paris in a ballet called Les Sylphides. And she, for the first time, she danced, and Sammy Oden will no doubt, he would kill me for this pronunciation, en pointe, I think is the pronunciation. She was the first ballerina to do that. And she created a scandal because she shortened her skirt in a Sylphide. So that was considered highly scandalous at the time, that people could see her legs, because the ballerinas at the time used to wear longer skirts. She wore like a mini skirt equivalent sort of thing. Now, she was an absolute major star, and this is a playbill from London in 1837. You can see she's got the lead here, Mademoiselle Taglioni, but here is Monsieur Paul Taglioni, which is her brother, and Madame Paul Taglioni, which is her sister-in-law. And also, you can see somewhere, if I can find it, it was her father who did a lot of the design for the ballets. He was the what's the word I'm looking for? Choreographer. That's the word I'm looking for. He was the choreographer for a lot of the work she did. So this was a very much a family business. Let's put it this way. And she was so famous that a paper doll, I've never actually seen one in person, but this is a photo of the paper doll that was produced of Marie Taglioni and the various outfits that she wore for her various ballets. And this, in her again, in Victoria's diary, she wrote, and I love this, after that was performed as Sylphide, Taglioni danced beautifully and looked lovely. I was very much amused. And as some of you may be aware that one of the things that Victoria was famous for later in life was being not amused. That was one of her favourite sayings, I am not amused. But certainly in 1833, as a young girl, having seen Taglioni in La Sylphide, she was very much amused. These are actually reputed to be the ballet shoes that, here's her signature, that Taglioni wore when she danced en pointe for the first time. So these are very famous. Now, okay, so back to the dolls. One thing Victoria did when she went to the ballet was to sketch what she saw. And as you can see, here's Mademoiselle Taglioni, and there's various sort of things. This is 1832, and this was one of the sketches that she did. And here's some more. Again, Mademoiselle Taglioni. So she clearly saw Taglioni many, many times at the ballet and sketched a lot of her performances. And here's another one. So in this book that I've got of the sketches, Taglioni appears a number of times. And here's Nathalie, another one. So what happened was Victoria would sketch these and then would go back home to Kensington Palace and they would make the dolls. So here is the first doll. This is Mademoiselle Taglioni as Nathalie. And if I can go back and you can look at the pictures, and then I go forward, you can see that the doll's clothing is based on the sketch. Now, just look at this is quite an early Gros Natal. It was the time that they were doing very individual faces, very individual impressions. And as you see pictures of the dolls, you'll see that they all look very different, although they're dressed differently, that the heads as well are very different, because at this time, these dolls were still being produced, not in their hundreds of thousands as they were later on, but they were produced individually in cottage industries in the Gros Natal. Here's Madame Taglioni is Louise in Kenilworth. Again, beautiful, beautiful clothing and different hairstyle, different expression. Here's Mademoiselle Taglioni is Sophie in La Tyrolienne. And these, as I say, all came from sketches that Victoria did at the ballet. And here's one of Mademoiselle Taglioni as Rosalie in La Raison Blanche. I'm told by people who make this sort of thing, I'm always eternally impressed, that given the size of this doll is about 6.5 inches, that the workmanship to make these sort of knitted little socks is unbelievable. The size of the needles would have been absolutely tiny. But again, this is Victoria and her governess and other people sitting by the fireside and dressing these wonderful, wonderful dolls. Here's another one, Taglioni as Galstra in La Tyrolienne. And here's a man, here's one of the 5 percenters, Mr. Paul Taglioni. So this is Taglioni's brother, Mademoiselle Taglioni's brother, Paul, dressed in his ballerina outfit. So the next batch is the courtiers. Now, it's interesting that as you go through them, you'll see I've managed to identify the names of the ladies and their titles, etc. But there's very little information on them anywhere. And I think it reflects the fact that at that time, women were not terribly public figures. So Taglioni was, she was on the stage, but these courtiers, it tended to be their husbands that I could find information about. They were either members of parliament or whatever. So it says something about the role of these ladies. It was not terribly public at the time. But the other comment I'll make is that when Victoria eventually got to court, people were absolutely amazed at how much she knew about the courtiers and who was who, and also the sort of how things were handled at court. So who had to sit at the head table, who had to go in front, protocol, if you like, court protocol. And I'm wondering whether the Baroness and her other ladies in waiting used the courtier dolls to sort of teach Victoria about who was who at court, as I say, and also, when she got to court, the sort of things you would need to know about the pecking order of duchesses and ladies, etc., etc. So that's another educational aspect of these dolls that I think may have come into play. So here is Juno, who is the Duchess of Durham. Wonderful sort of lacework, and I love that hat with the gold metal thread. This is Philippa, the Countess of Jedburgh. Again, I love the hairstyles on these with this very squiggly sort of hair coming onto the forehead. This is Clorinda, Countess of Newton. And remember, these dolls are about 6.5 inches, so the work to make these clothes, absolutely fabulous. This is Dowager Countess of Rothesay. This is Maria, Lady Bulkley. Beautiful lacework. Now, the third group is the imaginaries. Now, as I said at the beginning, there's no proof that any of these people ever existed, but yeah, it's I think I can only believe it was in Victoria's head. Now, I mentioned the Arnold family. This is Sir William Arnold. He's one of the few men again, and Sir William was surrounded by a bevy of beauties, because all the other dolls that I can find with the surname of Arnold are all women. So a monstrous regiment of women, as Sir John Knox said. But he seems to be happy about it. He looks a really contented individual. This is Sir William Arnold. And here is Lady Arnold, who's looking quite frou-frou, as I would call it, with all those frills. Here's Lady Maria Arnold. Lots of lace. This is Lady Agatha Arnold. She's actually one of my favourites in terms of clothing. I think it's so simple, but so wonderful, her clothing. This is Lady Gertrude Arnold. Now, this is one of the few dresses that I've seen are actually made of heavy velvet. And it's quite distinctive. Lady Gertrude Arnold. So I'm just taking a glass of water. And this is Miss Arnold, the very young and lovely Miss Arnold. So there was a lot of Arnolds, but there was also amongst the imaginaries this lady here, who's Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper. Now, Mrs. Martha is one of the few dolls that's 9 inches tall. So she was a good sort of 2 inches, 2.5 inches taller than the other dolls. And I look at Mrs. Martha and I think there was no messing with Mrs. Martha. I suspect she ruled the roost. I love the work on her apron with the lovely way it's been cut. And so she looks quite serious. I don't think, as I say, I'd mess with Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper. Before I move on, though, I wanted to talk about the doll's house. This is, again, you'd think of a princess's doll's house as being rather grand, but this is a simple one up, one down, box back, as it's called. And it literally is a box. And yes, it's got a front on it that opens up, as you can see, and the front would be sort of brick papered or whatever. But inside, it's been done beautifully, don't get me wrong, but this is not the sort of grandiose palace you'd expect a princess to have as a doll's house. And I love it personally, and I can imagine her playing with, the Arnolds being upstairs and Mrs. Martha being downstairs, organising everything. And it's a wonderful house. You can see it on display in Kensington Palace. It is wonderful. So, as I say, when she was 14, the dolls got put away, and the dolls, she never saw the dolls till after her mother had died. She never saw the dolls again. And it was when she was going through her mother's things that she rediscovered the dolls. And it was her mother who kept them safe and sound. So, although, her mother gets a lot of criticism of Victoria, they did become closer later in life. When her mother passed away, she was devastated. But for all the bad press her mother got when she was growing up, it was her mother who protected these dolls. So thank you to Mother for keeping these alive, because otherwise I think they'd be chucked out. So I think it was the mother that enabled us to enjoy them today. So wind the clock forward. Victoria has rediscovered the dolls, but it wasn't really until the 1890s that they became sort of into the public view at all. And what happened was there was an article written in what was called the Strand magazine. And remember, this was in 1892, if I remember rightly. Now, at that time, Queen Victoria had emerged from her widow. I mean, she really went into seclusion when Albert died, and was becoming quite unpopular because the public never saw her. But she emerged, and towards the end of her reign, in fact, she was celebrating all sorts of jubilees. She became very popular. So when this was published in 92, it was the height of her popularity, midway between the Golden Jubilee in 1887 and her Diamond Jubilee in 1897. And so this was produced. It was an article. And in it were all sorts of little pictures of the dolls. Now, you'll see down here, they've got little squares with numbers on them. These numbers correspond to the numbers that Victoria used in her list of dolls. Remember I said she'd made a list? Well, she numbered each doll. And you'll see helpfully down the bottom, it also says number 115 is the Duchess of Parma, and the Countess of Derwenter is number 120, etc., etc. So these photographs and the story of her dolls really caught the imagination of people. And I think the best way of putting it is the article went viral, if there's such a thing. Here's some more of these lovely pictures. Oh, there's Lady Arno. Do you recognise her with the velvet? You begin to recognise these the more you see them. And reference to the Princess Victoria's list, she actually referenced the list, and I'm not sure, whether it was that sort of resulted in the list being kept, but I'm very glad it was sort of mentioned, because I think it's really lovely to see it publicly now out on display at Kensington Palace. I mentioned that they had the odd sort of little baby. This is one of the babies, a cradle. And these were made of cloth, so these were not Gros Natals, but there was very, very few of them. And they were sort of made, it was the babies they were made for. So, as I say, the article went viral. So Francis Lowe, who wrote the article, decided to create a book. And he got an illustrator by the name of Alan Wright to actually do sketches of the dolls. Now, this book is actually still available today. It's not in print today, but it is available, and you can find it. You find it in different colours of cover. So I reckon there was more than one production, because I say the article went viral, so I can only imagine the book was very successful too. I have seen it with a white cover, a red cover, a blue cover, and as I say, if the actual prose is very Victorian, but really the pictures are delightful. So let me show you some of the pictures. Madame Taglioni, here she is as the doll, and this is how she appears. Here she is down the bottom here in the book. Now you'll notice that the colours in the sketches are different to some of the colours. These photographs are taken today, and I think some of the clothing, the colour of the material has shifted. So here we go. This is Juno, the Duchess of Durham. And here she is in the book. And you can see helpfully that the name is also put very faintly next to the doll, just in case there's any misunderstanding. Here's Philippa, Countess of Jedburgh. And here she is. As you can see, she's a different colour. The material has faded over time. He is Clorinda, Countess of Newton. And here she is here in the book. Here's Maria Lady Bulkeley as the doll. And this is her in the sketch. These are absolutely wonderful sketches. It's a real, if you can find a copy of the book, they are real treasures. Here's Lady Agatha Arnold. And here she is in the sketch. Lady Gertrude Arnold with the velvet. Here she is in the sketch. Here's Sir William Arnold. And this is him in the sketch. And this is Miss Arnold. And this is her in the sketch. Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper. And here she is in the book. And this was a picture at the end of the book, God Save Our Gracious Queen. I've not been able to find a photo of this little boy, but I wanted to include him because he's one of the few male dolls that she had. So I'd love to see if he survived, but I've not been able to trace him yet. I actually went through, there is online records of the various dolls in both the Kensington Palace and also the London Museum. And I did manage to find, I think it was 126 of the dolls, and a write-up about them. So I've recreated the diary, if you like. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. If you can just drop me an email and I'll send you a copy of it, because it's got a 3 or 4 line description of 126 of the dolls. And I've also got as many pictures as I could get offline. They don't have pictures of all the dolls at all. There's maybe 25 pictures. And most of them have been included in this talk. So yeah, I wish the museum could do a better job of promoting the dolls, but they've been doing okay, but they could do a lot more. So since then, that was in the 1890s. Well, there's been various things. As I say, it came every so often the book gets mentioned or the doll gets mentioned. This was a book, Queen Victoria by Lytton Strachey, I think is pronunciation, Strachey, in 1921, where it talks about, again, the dolls as she played with her dolls or scampered down the passages or rode on her donkey, etc., etc. So Queen Victoria, the dolls were mentioned there. You had Esther Singleton in 1927 talk about the dolls. Very much devoted to dolls and played with them until she was nearly 14 years old, the small wooden dolls, etc., etc. So they were given a bit of an outing there too. Constance Eileen King, bring it forward in time. She did mention in here, she mentions small red beads are used for their identification. This is the ones that were supposedly dressed by Princess Victoria. I haven't read that anywhere else, but that's an idea that the small red beads were used, or something was used to say which ones Victoria had dressed. Our very own Susan Dossiter, who many of you will know, member of UFDC, she did an article for Doll News and about her own Grand Natal collection, following in the footsteps of a princess. So she talked about the Queen Victoria's dolls there. I did an article 2019 for the Antique Doll Collector magazine. I haven't featured that here, but that was another outing for Queen Victoria's dolls. And then in the 60s, there was an exhibition in London to celebrate 200 years of jigsaws. And a jigsaw got produced of Queen Victoria's dolls. And this is the front of the box. So this is a Victoria jigsaw, and it was a number of Queen Victoria's dolls put on this lovely, lovely sort of spiral staircase. And in fact, this is on the front cover of this picture of the Coleman's First Encyclopedia, but the UK version. The US publishing had a different front, but this was on the front of the Coleman's Encyclopedia. This is the actual jigsaw. I have never seen the jigsaw, but someone very kindly knew somebody who had one and sent me a photograph, so you can see how the jigsaw is made up. And as I say, here is the cover of the encyclopedia. in the inside of the jigsaw thing, it actually showed which dolls were represented. So it names the 12 dolls. Oh, and there's Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper. There she is, number 9. As I say, the more you look at these, you become, and there's Taglioni, and then another Taglioni, and then there's a Lady Arnold, daughter of. So they begin to come family eventually. You look at them enough. Well, and now, so as I say, there've been quite a few exhibitions in the London Museum of London and also Kensington Palace. And if I can just bring you back now to Kensington Palace, if you remember, I showed you something at the beginning, which was a print. This is what it looks like now. Doesn't look very different, apart from the fact, of course, it's been opened up to the public. So you can go and see Kensington Palace or much of it. They've got exhibitions about the various royalties who stayed there. So William and Mary, they've got a Georgian exhibit, they've got a Queen Victoria exhibit, and they've got more modern exhibits there too. They had a Princess Diana exhibit, etc. So it's a wonderful place to visit if you ever come to London. And if you're lucky, there'll be a Queen Victoria visit program on. They usually do have one. This is the current exhibit. So this is a photo from my last visit there. They've got this huge cabinet, and at the back there you can see some of the dolls. And then they've got the doll's house. I had to take it through glass, unfortunately, so it's not a great photo. Some of her other toys, but as I say, no sign of a miniature theatre. This is a better photo of the 12 dolls. Can you recognise that as a Taglioni? There's a Miss Arnold. There's one of the courtiers. And this must be one of the babies. Yeah. They have to rotate them, I guess, from a preservation point of view, because, as I say, Grand Natals, if they're out too long under lighting, etc., it's not good for them or the clothing. This is a better photograph of the doll's house. But this was a recent addition to my program because, of course, it was, I believe, in Baltimore, if I remember correctly, that Alicia and Charlie Carver launched Wooden Recreations. Charlie's, I think, father and grandfather, I think he's the 3rd generation of wooden carvers. He had another career, but he's now taken up carving. And they launched 2 of their dolls, and you can probably recognise them as Sir William Arnold and Lady Agatha Arnold. These were the first 2 dolls they did, basing them on Queen Victoria's dolls, and they're absolutely fabulous. And of course, since then, they've produced other ones of those. Here we are. So here's the actual doll, and this is the reproduction. This is Gertrude, and here is Sir William. So, so let me just say a few more. So they produced others. They did at St. Louis. They did a ballerina, a Taglioni ballerina, as one of the meal event, and I think they also did a Taglioni and Paul Taglioni production as well. And then they've been doing others. So if you love these dolls, I'm doing a quick advert for Lucy and Charlie. You'll love if you love Queen Victoria's dolls, you know, learn a bit more. She's got a marvelous website which has a lot of Queen Victoria information on it and a blog, etc. So enjoy. So a final thought, really, that Queen Victoria reigned for a long time, from 1837 to 1901, and for many people, particularly because photography got invented towards the sort of latter part of her reign, they know her both from a filming point of view and also photography as the sort of older lady, the widow, always dressed in black. But I think what certainly there's been a number of programs and films recently about the sort of young Queen Victoria with Prince Albert, etc. But for me, what this research has done is it's made me think about Queen Victoria also as a much younger girl living in Kensington Palace, having a difficult upbringing, and really feeling that she has no friends, limited accessibility to the outside world. And we said before we started the program, the dolls were her safe and happy place. And I think that makes me feel a sort of kindred spirit with her, that I think we're all viewing dolls as safe and happy places, and I think it brings me personally closer to her as a person, because I can identify with that. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the program. We'd like to thank Carol Cameron for her support of our channel. If you're not already a member of UFDC, please become one. Go to ufdc.org and type in membership. And when you do, fill out your form. Be sure you tell them Karen sent you. Thanks so much for your support of our programs, and we'll see you next time.